My name is Tomás Rivera. I'm 38 years old. I live just outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a small house with a garden. My wife Lucia insists on overplanting every spring, in a way that produces more squash than any two people should reasonably need to eat. We have two daughters, 9 and 12. And most of what I know about patience, I learned somewhere between a restaurant kitchen and a household with two opinionated girls who have very specific ideas about hair, bedtime, and the correct way to load a dishwasher. I started working in kitchens at 16, washing dishes at a diner outside Albuquerque for a man named Hector who ran the place with his wife, and treated every employee, including a 16-year-old who barely knew how to hold a knife correctly, with more patience than I probably deserved at the time. I worked my way up over the years. Prep cook, then line cook, then sauté station, then expo, the position where you stand at the pass and call out tickets and make sure everything leaving the kitchen actually meets the standard it's supposed to meet. I worked in 6 different restaurants over 18 years before I had saved enough, combined with a small business loan that took me 4 attempts and 2 rejected applications to secure, to open Cantina Rivera. We've been open 6 years now. 40 seats, a kitchen I designed myself based on 2 decades of watching what works and what doesn't in a working line, and a menu built around the kind of New Mexican and Mexican cooking I grew up with, the kind my grandmother made, the kind that takes hours of unglamorous, repetitive work. Toasting chilies, reducing sauces, nixtamalizing corn the slow way because the fast way changes the flavor in ways I'm not willing to accept. I work the pass most nights myself. This means that on any given evening, I am standing in chef's whites, sleeves pushed up, calling out tickets, occasionally walking the floor to check on tables, refill water, clear plates when we're short-staffed, which, on a busy Thursday, we often are. I do not wear a suit in my own restaurant. I do not carry myself, most nights, in a way that announces ownership, because ownership has never been the part of this work that matters to me. The food matters. The room matters. Whether people leave fed and cared for matters. The rest is administrative. This is, I think, an important thing to understand before I tell you about Diane Wexford, because the entire shape of what happened that Thursday depended on exactly this: a woman looking at a man in a white apron and seeing precisely nothing beyond the apron. She arrived around 7:30 with 3 friends, a reservation under her name for a party of 4. The kind of table that our host described afterward as having main character energy, before the night had even gotten difficult. Meaning, the kind of table that announces, through small gestures, that it expects to be the most important table in the room. I wasn't on the floor when they arrived. I was at the pass, working through a Thursday ticket rush that had us running close to full capacity, which is the kind of night that requires complete focus. The kind where you don't have spare attention for anything beyond the next 6 tickets in front of you. The first sign of trouble came from my server, a young woman named Bree who's worked with us for 2 years and rarely gets rattled by anything. She came to the pass with a plate of carne adovada, the dish, slow-braised pork in red chili, that's been on our menu since we opened, and that I make almost exactly the way my grandmother made it, and said, quietly, "Table 6 wants this remade. They said it's too spicy." I looked at the plate. It was correct. It was exactly the dish it was supposed to be, made the way it's always made, the way it's described on the menu, which states clearly that the dish carries a moderate chili heat. I remade it anyway, adjusting the chili ratio down slightly to accommodate what I assumed was a genuine difference in spice tolerance, because that is simply part of running a kitchen. Sometimes the dish is correct and the table's preference is different. And the work is to bridge that gap without making anyone feel foolish for having a preference. 15 minutes later, Bree was back. "They sent it back again. She says now it's bland." I looked at the second plate. It was not bland. It was, if anything, slightly under-seasoned compared to our standard, exactly per the adjustment I'd made for the table's stated preference. I remade it a 3rd time, splitting the difference, plating it with extra care. The way you do when you suspect the problem in front of you has very little to do with the food. While I worked on the 3rd plate, Bree told me, in the brief, hurried way servers update a kitchen during a rush, what was actually happening at table 6. The woman, Diane, according to the reservation, had been narrating the entire experience to her 3 friends at a volume clearly intended for nearby tables to hear. She had described the first plate as trying too hard to seem authentic. She had described the second plate as evidence that, You really can't trust a kitchen that doesn't have an actual chef running it. You can tell when it's just whoever's working that night. She had asked Bree, with the specific tone of someone performing concern for an audience, whether the restaurant had actual culinary training back there, or if it's more of a family operation type situation. I want to be honest about how that last comment landed because I think it matters to the story. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something more familiar to me than cruelty. The particular confident carelessness of someone who has decided, instantly and without curiosity, what kind of operation she's sitting in and who's running it, based on nothing more than the fact that the kitchen serves food she finds unfamiliar enough to be suspicious of. The third plate went out. I watched, from the pass, as Bree set it down. I watched Diane Wexford take one bite, set down her fork, and turn to say something to her table mates that made all three of them look toward the kitchen at once. This is when I walked the floor myself, which I do most nights regardless of how a given table is behaving, because checking on tables is simply part of running a small restaurant well. I was in my whites, an apron still tied at my waist, carrying a water pitcher, because that's what was in my hand when I decided to walk out. Refilling glasses is not beneath the owner of a 40-seat restaurant. Not on a busy Thursday. Not ever. I reached table 6 and began refilling water glasses. The ordinary, unremarkable task of anyone working a dining room. This is honestly the third time. Diane was saying to her friends, not lowering her voice in any meaningful way. And I just think it speaks to a larger problem. You can tell when a kitchen doesn't have real direction. It's amateur hour back there, genuinely. I don't know what I expected from a place with this many 5-star reviews online, but clearly the algorithm is broken, because this is not what I'd call a serious kitchen. I finished refilling her water glass. She did not look at me. Not once, through the entire sentence, did her eyes move to the person standing 18 inches from her, holding the pitcher, wearing the whites of the kitchen she was describing. I want to be clear that I did not say anything in that moment. I am not in the business of correcting customers' opinions about my food in the middle of service. And more than that, I have learned, over 22 years in this industry, that a moment like that is rarely the right moment for anything, except finishing the task in front of you and returning to the work that actually matters. I refilled the other 3 glasses at the table, said nothing, and walked back to the kitchen. I did want her to be heard, though. Not corrected exactly, but heard, in a way that might let her hear herself a little more clearly than she was managing to in the moment. So when Bree came back to the pass a few minutes later, I asked her to do something I rarely ask of my servers. I asked her to invite table 6, specifically Diane, into the kitchen. For what? Bree asked, understandably uncertain. Tell her the chef would like to walk her through the dish personally, I said. Tell her it's a courtesy we extend when there's been repeated dissatisfaction. It's true, we do that. I just don't usually need to. Bree delivered the invitation. I watched from the pass as Diane's posture shifted, the particular straightening that happens when someone realizes a complaint they made for an audience is about to get a more direct audience than they planned for. She came back with her friends trailing behind her, the way an audience follows a story to its conclusion. I was standing at my station when they came through the kitchen door, apron still on, hands still moving on the next ticket because the rush hadn't stopped just because table 6 had a grievance. Diane, this is Tomás, Bree said. He's been finishing your dish personally. I looked up. Good evening, I said. I understand there's been some trouble with the carne adovada tonight. I'd like to walk you through it if that's all right, so we can get it exactly where you need it. Diane looked at me, properly for the first time, and I watched the specific rapid recalibration happen on her face. The apron, the pass, the other cooks deferring to me without being asked. The particular way a kitchen organizes itself around whoever is actually in charge, which is visible to anyone paying attention, and which she clearly had not been paying attention to until this exact moment. You're the chef, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I am, I said. I'm also the owner. Cantina Rivera is mine. Has been for 6 years. I watched her process this. Watched the sentence about amateur hour, the comment about family operations, the entire performance she delivered at table 6 for an audience of 3 friends and however many nearby tables had been close enough to hear, replay itself behind her eyes with an entirely different cast of characters than she'd assumed she was performing for. I didn't realize, she said, and her voice had lost the performative edge it had carried at the table. "Most people don't," I said. "I work the floor most nights. It's useful. I see what's actually happening with a dish before someone tells me secondhand." I gestured to the pass. "Let me show you the adovada. The first plate you sent back was made to the recipe as written, moderate chili heat, the way it's listed on the menu. The second was adjusted down for what I understood to be a spice preference. The third split the difference. I want to understand specifically what isn't working for you, because right now, I genuinely don't know if the issue is heat, salt, texture, or something else entirely, and I'd like to fix the actual problem rather than guess a fourth time." She was quiet for a moment. Her friends behind her had gone very still, the particular stillness of an audience realizing the show has changed shape without warning. "I think," Diane said slowly, "the dish was probably fine. All 3 times." "Can I ask what was actually going on?" I said, not unkindly, genuinely. She looked down for a moment. "I had a difficult conversation with my sister before we got here tonight, about our mother. I think I was looking for somewhere to put that, and the chili was the easiest target in the room." She looked back up at me. "That's not an excuse for what I said about the kitchen. I was wrong about that, regardless of what kind of night I was having." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I called it amateur hour," she said. "To a man who, it turns out, has run a professional kitchen for over 20 years and owns the building I was sitting in." "You did," I agreed, without any particular edge to it. She stood there for a moment in my kitchen, the heat and noise and motion of a working Thursday service continuing around her, cooks moving past with plates, the particular organized chaos that a dining room never sees. "Could I get a 4th plate?" she asked, "made exactly the way it's supposed to be made? I'd like to actually taste it properly this time." I made it myself. Standard recipe, no adjustments, the dish exactly as my grandmother taught it to me, and as I've made it for 6 years. I plated it with the same care I give every plate that leaves my kitchen, regardless of what table it's going to, or what that table said about my staff 20 minutes earlier. She ate it at the pass, standing in my kitchen, while her friends waited awkwardly by the door. "This is genuinely very good," she said, and there was something almost surprised in her voice. The surprise of someone tasting a thing properly for the first time, after 3 attempts at tasting something else entirely. Her own evening, her own difficult conversation, dressed up as a complaint about chili. "Thank you," I said. "I owe your staff an apology," she said. "Bree specifically. I was unkind to her for something that had nothing to do with her." "That would mean something to her," I said. Before she left, she asked if she could leave a review correcting the comments she'd made at the table. Not because I'd asked her to, but because, she said, she didn't like the idea of her bad night becoming a permanent, inaccurate record of my kitchen's actual standard. I told her that was her choice to make, not an obligation to me. She apologized to Bree on her way out, sincerely. The kind of apology that doesn't perform itself for an audience the way her complaint had. Her friends left tips that suggested some quiet conversation had happened in the parking lot about the evening. I went back to the pass and finished the Thursday rush, because that is what the work actually requires, regardless of how any single table's evening unfolds. I thought, briefly, about my grandmother's kitchen, about Hector at the diner who gave a 16-year-old his first real job, about the particular invisibility that comes with wearing an apron in a room where people have already decided, before they've met you, what an apron means about who you are and what you're capable of. I don't need every difficult table to end in a moment of recognition. Most nights, they don't. Most nights, someone is simply unhappy with their meal for reasons that have nothing to do with the meal, and the work is just to absorb that, adjust what can be adjusted, and keep the line moving. But there is something quietly worth remembering in a night like that one. Not the satisfaction of being recognized exactly, but the simple, durable fact that the apron was never the whole story. It never is. Not for me, not for the people I've worked beside in kitchens for 22 years, not for anyone standing in a uniform that someone else has decided to read as the entire shape of who they are. If you've ever been underestimated because of what you were wearing when someone met you, leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you know someone who works the line, the floor, the counter, anywhere people make snap judgments about what an apron or a uniform means, tell them the apron was never the whole story. See you in the next one!